Morning, everyone. So I'm Simon Blainey. I work at the University of Southampton, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the work we've been doing about transport modelling. So this work has been led by myself and also Professor John Preston, who is here somewhere in the room, but most of the hard work has actually been done by one of our researchers, Dr. Milan Lovric. So he's the guy to thank for all the hard work that's gone into this. So the analysis we've been doing for this project has been undertaken using something called version 2 of the NISMOD transport model. So NISMOD, as we've heard already, is the ITRC's National Infrastructure Systems Modelling Framework. Modules in that cover a number of different sectors, including transport. So the transport model has three main modules, a railway station demand model, an airport demand and capacity model, and a road demand and capacity model. And it's the road model that I'm going to focus on particularly today, and it's the road model that has been used most extensively in the ARC analysis. So the road model covers the whole of the major road network for Great Britain, so that's all A roads and motorways, and this is down to quite a high level of spatial detail. So the model divides Great Britain up into either 380 local authority districts, or potentially you can go right down to the level of Tempro zones, so that's just over 7,500 zones covering the whole of the UK. And it looks at trips within and between those zones. So underlying the model is an origin-destination matrix looking at the base level of trips between those zones in the model base year. This has been estimated based on traffic count data and calibrated against data on total vehicle kilometres, trip length distributions, and the total number of recorded car trips. So based on that origin-destination matrix, we then generate a set of routes for each of the flows within that matrix. This route generation is done offline, so not when the model is run, because this is a very computationally intensive process. But what the model then does is take this set of routes and allocate trips between between zones to one of the route options based on the relative costs of those different routes. So it's essentially a probability-based assignment of trips onto the road network. So what the model can then do is adjust the level of traffic on those flows over time based on changes in a number of exogenous variables, so things like, say, population change, but also endogenous variables to transport, so things like changes in fuel costs, for instance. And the model will then output a set of essentially key performance indicators at different levels of spatial aggregation. So at the link level, you have things like travel time, average speed, and capacity utilization. At the zonal level, you have vehicle kilometers. At the interzonal level, you have average travel times and travel costs. And then at the national level, you have transport energy consumption and also CO2 emissions. And these KPIs can be disaggregated by time of day, by road category, by vehicle type, and also by engine type. So that's how the model works. In terms of what it's intended to do, so the idea behind the model is that it's capable of assessing at the macro scale a whole range of different future scenarios and policy interventions around transport, but also covering the interdependencies between transport and things like future settlement patterns. So, for example, things that you can look at include the construction of new infrastructure, so in this case the East-West Expressway, also the expansion of existing infrastructure, so adding extra lanes to existing roads. It could actually also look at removing elements of infrastructure, so closing roads, although that's not something that happens in practice very often. Maybe it should. Also, a range of pricing options, so things like changes to the taxation or charging regime, so for instance, introducing a congestion charge in a certain area. Changes to the vehicle fuel mix, so for example, electrification of the vehicle fleet, or say a shift to hydrogen. Changes to vehicle performance, so that might be things like technological developments allowing an improvement in fuel efficiency, or it might be things like a shift to autonomous vehicles, meaning that effectively each vehicle takes up less of the available road capacity. And finally, we can also look at things around travel behaviour change by adjusting the trip rates of the population living in different zones. So in terms of how we've applied this to the ARC, so we've assessed basically three things. So first of all, expressway route B1 from Oxford to Milton Keynes. So you may be aware there's a number of potential corridors that this road could take. We have chosen to focus on one of those, and we've made some assumptions about how exactly that would connect into the national network. Now, those are just assumptions, and actually the precise locations of where the connectivity between the new road and the existing road occurs does have quite an impact on the results you get out. So this is just kind of an illustrative example. But yeah, so one route for the expressway, also some road enhancements, so expanding existing capacity between Bedford and Cambridge, and finally a set of new railway stations associated with East-West Rail. So we've assessed the impacts of these transport infrastructure changes under the three dwelling scenarios described earlier, as well as the baseline, and in all cases assuming that there is a transition towards more sustainable vehicle fuels in the form of the gradual electrification of the vehicle fleet over the period that's being studied. So I'm aware I'm short of time, so you will be hearing more about the results this afternoon when you come round to our station out in the other room, but just some things to highlight to give you a bit of a taster. So one of the things we found was that actually in terms of the impact of the new road on travel times, the impact of the road is relatively limited in uncongested conditions between central Milton Keynes and central Oxford, and that's all down to exactly where we connect this new road into the existing network. However, the new road, we think, could significantly reduce travel times between Oxford and Cambridge, although that does depend on exactly where the new developments are placed and therefore what level of additional traffic they generate. What we find with all of our population growth scenarios, though, is that actually, because of the level of population growth that's expected to occur, we are going to get a very significant increase in congestion levels throughout the road network in the area, simply because there are so many more people trying to travel. And actually, in the grand scheme of things, the infrastructure expansion that's being put in place is fairly limited. So given a large increase in trips, what you get is more congestion. And that the planned road expansions and developments are in themselves insufficient to prevent travel time increases in the long run. So you might then say, well, what does that mean? Should we just build lots more roads? Probably not. We probably need to take a more intelligent look at how we can manage all this additional travel demand that is being generated and find ways to hopefully accommodate it more sustainably within the transport system. And then the final point to make is that in all cases we have looked at vehicle electrification, and we find that, perhaps unsurprisingly, this could lead to quite a sharp decrease in certainly the direct carbon emissions from transport by 2050, even under high population growth scenarios, assuming this level of electrification is achievable. Now, that doesn't take into account power generation, though as we've heard, this can be achieved sustainably. It also doesn't take into account the embedded carbon associated with that shift to electric vehicles. That's kind of outside the scope of this analysis, but that would obviously need to be borne in mind as well if you were undertaking a full life cycle cost analysis. But obviously the corollary of that, that shift to electric vehicles is that this will mean that there will be a substantial increase in the electricity demands made by the transport sector, and that is dealt with under the coupled energy model, which is what you are going to hear about next from Madassa. So I will stop there and seamlessly hopefully transition into the energy work.